with this event, which is a presentation of artists' work for the first time in Scotland. We have 2 screenings and some discussion, and the book will be available for purchase if you wish after the event. It's also available online and in bookstores. So over to Katarzyna. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll just say very briefly a few things about the book. So the book is really looking at the idea of a construction of the gender, and it's really trying to challenge the idea of how do we understand the heteronormative realm of what is masculinity, what is femininity in today's world. Looking at the lens of contemporary visual art practice, especially situated in the context of European realms. My research really focused on the artists' works who exhibited or are based or through diaspora renegotiated spaces of living and working within the European context. So what I'm trying to do is not only engage with the idea of a construction of gender and the kind of socio-economic discourse about the men and masculinities theories, but also what I'm trying to engage with if a space of visual culture and trying to challenge the kind of idea of a focus of the contemporary visual culture as tied to Anglo-American imagery, and actually trying to promote much more European context for the artist's work in terms of critical writing. Each book is dealing with different space of masculinity, sort of working life in a context of leisure, in a context of sport, in a context of private space like sexualities, aging, lifestyle. So there are different types of spaces I'm exploring, and in one of the chapters I'm looking at the globalization and the labor markets, and in one of the space I'm really looking at is the idea of a masculinity at the bottom of economic ladder, so trying to challenge this idea of how we actually perceive the success today. Each chapter refers to several artists' works, and that's how on that basis, in the practice of visual practice, I'm trying to deconstruct the idea of a notion of gender in a heteronormative realms. So I'm really pleased to have here today with us Kennedy Browne duo. In one of my chapters I'm referring directly and engaging critically with their work, How Capital Moves from 2010. I would like to now introduce them in a sense that asking them question, because in their work not only deal with the idea of construction of the gender, but also they practice in a way they deal with the idea of a construction of the gender by the kind of mysterious way of calling themselves Kennedy Browne, and I would like them to unpack that a little bit as a sense of introduction, and also perhaps introduce the first work, which is How Capital Moves, before we go into the screening, and focusing in particularly about the idea of co-production in the context of the practice as Kennedy and Browne understand themselves.
Thank you, Katarzyna. This is Kennedy. I'm Browne. For context, I'm Sarah Browne, and this is Gareth Kennedy. So I suppose for people that don't know the work, it's important to maybe describe. Sometimes we talk about Kennedy Browne a bit as a third person. So we talk about Kennedy Browne as somebody over there that's doing this stuff. So we like the idea that this is an individual that has, with these 2 surnames, has a kind of a slightly ambiguous and flexible gender structure. More than maybe the work directly dealing with gender, it's kind of from the way it's formed with this collaboration, it quite naturally arises that you're kind of dealing with quite interesting presumptions from people about how an artist operates and maybe how a man and a woman might work together.
As happens when people work in partnership, maybe outside view tries to determine how do you unpack things, how do you neatly kind of determine which bit's Gareth's and which bit's Sarah's. But I suppose we really strongly defined and kind of nurtured the practice as it's really the space in between us that the work comes out of. To be fair, we probably agree with each other 92% of the time or so, thereabouts. But it's really that kind of 8% that we're working on a project that causes kind of interesting kind of frictions that have to be unpacked, that have to be discussed, that have to be unraveled. That's good. For me, that's the kind of wellspring of the work.
We tend to work with moving image quite a lot, and we work with collaborative ways of scripting things. And we often work with materials that are already somewhat existing. So there's kind of a series of authors in a given piece. And we think about scripting as a way of we think about, I suppose, capitalism or neoliberalism as a kind of script that we're taught as something that exists, maybe a myth. And we think about our practices trying to generate alternative myths from within that, or alternative narratives from within that. So to introduce how capital moves, this is the first of these two works that we'll screen tonight are the first two works of a trilogy that we consider, that we call the redaction trilogy. And we think about redaction not just as a way of removing information, but also as kind of taking a big pot of diverse material and distilling it into something that maybe makes this some kind of singular narrative. Believed in Company is the only one that is pretty much verbatim from the blog, this character in the bunny suit. And this pyjama character in this story about Pyjama Day came to, I suppose, be what we adopted as the visual motif in the work. And thinking about the pyjamas and somebody wearing pyjamas and the kind of uncertain space that signifies, whether that's lounging at home, working at home, in a cafe, or being depressed and laid off, or whatever that is. And then the other characters are composites of the positions that they seem to represent, that seem to be represented on the blog, whether that was kind of rumour mongers in middle management, or, you know, people that were kind of finding this a bit amusing and whatever, or maybe stoned and paranoid call centre workers, or whatever. So it's actually written that 3 of the characters are male and 3 of them are female. That isn't evident unless you read the script or speak Polish, and then you understand that. And this actor, but you can see that the actor is kind of a screen. He's not really connected to these individuals.
It was commissioned for the Łódź Biennial in Poland in 2010. Us coming from Ireland, we were very interested in the story, the effects and the causes of an American multinational computer factory which was operational in Limerick City in the southwest of the country, which had recently moved to Łódź in Poland. So we were very interested in investigating the effects of this on in an Irish context. 1,500 jobs were directly lost, but in the broader economy, directly 10,000 jobs were lost. Just to discuss kind of our source material, we always knew there'd be a translation thing involved. We're not so comfortable in going other places and just, you know, readily accepting and performing in the contemporary hegemonic language, which is English. So we always knew there'd be a Polish language involvement. This work is scripted from a website, an online blog, a singular blog, which we won't name, and we won't indeed name the company for this evening. We'll just refer to it as the company for fictive purposes. Like this website, this blog we came across, it was a kind of space for online solidarity for workers, not just based in Ireland, but based around the company's global network. Austin, Texas, Hyderabad in India, Roseburg in Oregon, Limerick in Ireland, and so on. So in examining this forum, we went through this forum, and out of this we scripted 6 psychologies.
I suppose just to say that it's important for us to extrapolate from quite a particular context into something bigger, and also to try to find a form of visual representation that doesn't fall into expected categories. So when dealing with really difficult emotional stories around redundancy, that you're not kind of performing a victim tourism or telling stories that are already known. So I don't think we need to say anything else. It's probably time to screen the work, but just to read out the disclaimer. The work is based on true stories. All characters appearing in the work are anonymous personae. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is coincidental. And we can speak a little bit more when we've all seen the work.
Wysoko posadzone i dobrze poinformowane źródła powiedziały mi, że można spodziewać się cięć na naszym korporacyjnym drzewku. Nie jestem pewny ich lokalizacji, Ale tutaj jesteśmy na celowniku. No cóż, firma zawodzi Wall Street na całej linii. Kwartał za kwartałem. No, z pewnością sprzedadzą w tym roku więcej komputerów niż w zeszłym, ale i tak nie osiągną swoich celów finansowych. Zresztą przewidziałem to już 6 tygodni temu. I tak liczby są kompletnie zmyślone.
Od początku. Zawsze mówili winning with integrity. Zwyciężać uczciwie. To, co miało nas wyróżniać. A ja obserwowałem, jak za każdym razem zaprzeczają sami sobie. Wcześniej zrozumieliśmy, że czarne to białe, a góra to dół.